Hi, Daniel. Good morning from me. Good evening to you, and Happy New Year's as well.
Happy New Year's, Reed.
Yeah.
How are you going?
Oh, pretty well. I've had a nice kind of lull between a few projects for a few weeks, so it's actually been nice to not only take a bit of a Christmas break, but also just have a little bit of downtime. I've definitely appreciated being able to read a bit more. How about you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I've actually been down with the flu or something like that for the past week or so. I'm starting to get better these days, but yeah, didn't want to miss this live stream for sure. So, but I mean, other than that, business as usual. Everything is fine and dandy, and yeah, interesting stuff happening in the world of DAX and Power BI. So that's awesome.
Yeah, well, I mean, a handful of new functions that I think have a lot of current and potential like future use cases that I'm really interested in as well.
Yep.
It's not often DAX gets new things, and arguably most of the time DAX gets a new function that, and I say it in this in training every time, is it's usually syntax sugar. Like it up at, for the most part it already has all the functions at its core that can do the base things that you need to. It's just like how can if we find a common pattern that is taking people 18 lines of code, how can we maybe provide a couple functions where you can do it in 4 and just make it easier. So it is rare to see some new
Okay.
functions that actually add like entirely new functionality. I know we got a couple of new ones, at least exposed in Power BI when calculation groups were added, and then a few others when field parameters were added as well. But it is definitely
Yep.
something that only happens every 1 to 2 years for entirely new functions with new behaviors that don't just repackage previous ones.
Yeah, and it's funny because it's always the very first thing that I'm looking for when I'm reading the monthly update blog post. So what's new in the modeling section? Are there any new
Yep.
DAX functions? Any new functionality in the modeling part? I mean, all the other stuff about visuals and connectivity, I mean, that's kind of nice, but I mean, the real good stuff is
Yep.
the modeling. And oftentimes, I'm pretty sad because, yeah, as you said, new DAX functions is not something we're getting every month. But when we do, I mean, it's usually something pretty interesting that we're getting.
Agreed. And I actually just had a comment from Greg that just made me think of something. But I think for the last 3 years, within a month or two of December, I've had you and Tabular Editor on each time because I know a couple of years ago or last year, you did Tabular Editor 3 with the debugger around this time. What was it, a year
Yep.
before that you debuted the Tabular Editor? And yeah, so I think it's all about December or January. Just coincidentally, we've managed to get you on around this time each year to
Yeah,
talk about
it's
something new
funny how
related to
that works
TE.
out.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
this is
true,
becoming like
true.
an annual thing. It's great.
Yeah, yeah, we should probably schedule next year's event
Right?
already now,
Just
just to
think
make
ahead,
sure.
or like, all right, what can we like announce or launch in 2024?
Yeah.
But I think one thing that I do want to just do as a quick mention. So for people tuning into the channel, I'm assuming almost everyone here is familiar with Daniel, but he's the individual who's behind the entire concept of Tabular Editor, both 2 and 3. And at one point, it was just a free tool that a couple of pro experts like myself were using. But since 2 years ago, when you launched Tabular Editor 3, it's been a full-time venture for you for your business between you and your partners, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we launched Tabular Editor 3 1.5 years ago now in June
Mm,
2021.
okay.
So yeah, that's 1.5 years we've been live on this commercial model. I do want to point out, though, it's a very important thing for me that Tabular Editor 2 is not going anywhere. It's still going to be
Yeah,
open
yeah.
source. It's still going to be free, and we will keep it up to date. Like when there's new modeling features added to analysis services or new DAX functions or whatever, we'll make sure that it supports all of those capabilities. So if you're using Tabular Editor 2 today, you don't need to worry. You can still use that in the future. Version 3 is just the premium offering for those who want even more productivity and even more features combined into a single tool, right? So that's the idea.
And I want to even further emphasize the fact that there's no modeling feature that's restricted from being able to add between 2 and 3. It adds the extra developer features like the DAX debugger. It has
Yep.
the your version of IntelliSense that's built into it to the helper tool for scripting and everything else, and a lot of other stuff that's just better for automation and things. But any any specific feature that you want to do to add to the model or configure or reconfigure can still be done in TE2. It just might not have as many of the bells and whistles to necessarily apply it, or you have to kind of
Exactly.
more manually code certain things.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not like we are preventing you from adding, say, calculation
Yep.
groups to a model using T2. You can still do that, absolutely. But with T3, we have all of the IntelliSense-like capabilities and, all of the features that just in general makes your life easier when you're building these models.
Exactly. But yeah, I'm happy to have you back on for this. Is it 3 or was there any session in between that I had you on at one point? I think this is at least our third live stream.
Yeah, third time, I think.
Yeah,
Maybe
because TE Tabular Editor 3 launch, Tabular Editor 3 DAX debugger, and then this one today. I'm almost up, by the way, just as a channel announcement. I did not think I would ever get to this many live streams. You're like number 94, 93. I'm almost to 100.
Wow.
So actually next month in February, for my 100th, I'm going to do something a little bit fun and unique. But I did not think I would get up to that. I assumed when I started doing these 2 years ago, like I'm going to run out of presenters or topics. Like there's no way I can do this consistently every week and run out of stuff. But I still have I have streams scheduled all the way out until the end of April with guests and topics. And I find that by the time I have someone, or I've ran through my guest presenter list, the individuals will usually have a new topic for the following year to come back onto. Just, with most individuals who present at conferences, you generally create new ones each year. So it's actually, it's definitely now one of my favorite things, but I'm just amazed that I managed to get this many people from the community onto the stream and continue the momentum after about 2 years now. So
that's really great, and it's always a pleasure to be here. And just while we're at it, let me just put in a shameless plug for the fact that we as a Tabular Editor, the company, we are doing our best to give back to the community in any way we can. So we are trying to sponsor as many of the Power BI related conferences as possible.
That's awesome.
So that's also an opportunity for people to come meet the team since we are growing these days. We've recently just onboarded 2 people and expecting another one to onboard next month. So a lot of things are happening, and we will be traveling. We'll be on site at SQL Bits this year, and additional upcoming conferences as well to be announced. So if you can, make sure to attend all of these conferences. In general, they are great, but it's also a good opportunity to come say hi and actually meet us face to face.
I'm gonna drop the link for SQL Bits in here, but yeah, I'll be there as well. I'm doing at least a lightning talk and hopefully a general session as well, but I will definitely be seeing you there in person. And if you're going to be back at Next Steps again in Denmark, then I will probably be there as well. That's awesome.
Yeah,
and I know, go ahead.
No, yeah, I was just saying, most likely I won't be attending SQL Bits personally. However, my colleagues will be there. And the reason I won't be attending is because my wife is due to give birth like 1 or 2 weeks after SQL Bits. So I don't want to be like traveling and then risk missing her her giving birth. So for that reason, I'm probably going to stay home this time.
So you and Kurt, Data Goblins, so your 2 kids are likely to be born about a week or 2 apart. His wife, I think, is due either right before or right after SQL Bits. From my understanding.
I think it's just a couple of weeks from now. Actually, she's due.
Is it a little bit sooner? Okay.
So, yeah. So, but I guess Kurt will be going as well, but he probably won't stay for the whole week if I know him right. So yeah.
Exactly. But yes, I think hopefully I'll get a chance to see some of the other familiar faces from. Remind me again, what's the actual name of the company that is the owner of Tabular Editor?
Right. So the company is also named Tabular Editor, so that way it's kind of easy to remember. But we are part of a larger conglomeration, a larger enterprise called 2Day, where and 2Day also owns the consulting company Capacity, where I started, and a couple of other consulting businesses as well.
Capacity was the one that I've seen a few times as that was the company name that I was trying to remember. Okay.
Right. I see.
Excellent. Perfect. But yeah, do you want to get started on talking about some of these new DAX functions?
Yeah, let's see it. Yeah. So what I have here on my screen is actually a snippet from Jeffrey Wang's blog post, which I highly recommend. It's very technical, but nonetheless very interesting if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty details of the three new functions. And just for reference, the functions that we are talking about here are the offset, index, and window functions, and collectively these are called DAX window functions. So there are three of them. They are quite similar when it comes to the syntax and their behavior, and they have different uses as we will see. So basically, the syntax as shown here, they follow the same basic pattern, where you have the function name at the front. Then you have some criteria for selecting or for specifying which rows you want the function to output. For the offset and the index function, you only need one argument here, whereas for the window function, you need at least two, and you can have up to four arguments. And then what follows, and this is a bit atypical when it comes to DAX functions, because all of the remaining parameters that you see are actually optional. You have to specify at least one of them, but you can actually skip. So, for example, you don't necessarily need to specify the table parameter. You can see it's marked as optional. But then if you omit that, then you will have to specify the auto by. So there are a couple of rules on how and which parameters needs to be specified in order for these functions to work. So one thing we've been putting a lot of effort into for the December release of Power BI Desktop, where this was announced, was to make sure that we have full support for these new functions in the IntelliSense within Tabular Editor 3. So let's try to take a look at what these functions look like when we execute them, or when we start to write some code using these functions in Tabular Editor. So just for demo purposes, I created a model here, and one of the tables in this model is just a simple table containing the numbers 1 through 10. And one little detail you have to be aware about is that the table parameter, basically the table that you feed into the window functions, needs to have only unique values. Otherwise, you're going to get an error. So basically, since this is just a free floating tables without any relationships to other tables of the model, I actually had to set the key property of the value column here to true, to basically statically tell the engine that this table is only going to contain unique values. Otherwise, I would get an error when I was trying to use this table with these new functions. So let's see how the new IntelliSense works with these functions in Tabular Editor 3. So let me zoom in a little bit here, and then we can start to write a query. So let's start by looking at the index function. So basically, what index does is it allows you to provide an absolute index into the table. So just imagine a table as just a collection of rows, and then this function then allows you to just retrieve one of these rows by its position, using an order and optionally a partitioning function that you specify. So in this case, if we say that we want the record at position 1, and that should be from the numbers table, then naturally we just get the one record that has the value 1, right? Because the values are just linearly incrementing. One thing to note here is that when we don't specify the auto by parameter, which we definitely could if we wanted to, is that the engine is just going to automatically or default to just ordering by all of the columns of this expression in a random order, I guess, or maybe some kind of metadata order. So in this example, it doesn't really matter since this table only has one column, so it'll always just be ordered by their numerical value, as we see here. So that means very, very trivially that whatever index I put here will just retrieve that particular row from this table. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. We can also index from the bottom from the bottom of the table. So if we wanted to get like the last row without knowing how many rows in advance are there, we can just type -1, so negative numbers basically. If we wanted to the second to last row, we would type -2, and so on and so forth.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's
I honestly would have assumed that instead of like a negative number, similar to like a rank, there would have been a ascending or descending or something as a condition. So it's interesting that you go into negative values.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's the point of the order by function basically. So if for example we flip the order of the columns around, so let's say we now order by value in descending order instead, then you basically flipped the order of the input, and now you index into position 1. We are of course going to get the row with value 10 here, since we basically flipped the order before we indexed into it.
And that order by the way, will be based off of the numerical value, not necessarily the imported row order that the table has. So like, let's assume that the table with 10 rows was imported with 1, 3, 5, 7, 2, 4, 6, 8 or something. It will essentially sort it numerically and then return the in this case the largest number. Okay.
Yeah, it'll be sorted by the values in the column, whatever they may be. Exactly. So basically, if we do like this, so sorting in ascending order, this would be equivalent to not specifying the order by thing at all, because that would be the default, to just sort all of the columns in ascending order. So as you can see here, there's no difference if I now get rid of order by and execute the query again. We just get the first row. So that's just the default, is to sort the columns in ascending order if we don't specify order by. Yeah. So one other interesting thing here is that we actually don't need to specify the table name as well. We can just jump straight to the order by parameter, and we can sort of see that by, you can see we have the little arrows here on the tooltip. So this actually shows us how we can actually skip to the next sort of option in the way we can type out the syntax for this function. So once we have specified the position parameter, we basically have two more options. One is to specify the relation parameter, which is the table or a table expression that we want to use as input, or alternatively we could omit the relation parameter and then go straight to the order by parameter. So in this case, we would do something similar, and we would just then have to specify the name of the column that we want to order by. So let's once again go with the value function. And if we omit the ascending or descending keyword, it'll just default to ascending, of course, which makes more sense. So we could basically do the same thing like this. So this way, if we wanted to specify some custom sort order, we could actually save a few keystrokes here, since we wouldn't have to specify the name of the table itself.
Okay. And now, question because I know in many ways the IntelliSense, that is, and I keep using that term. I know that's a Microsoft reserved.
Right.
Like, what do you call the helper in Tabular Editor?
Yeah.
I forget the name.
Yeah. So collectively we call these features code assist.
Code assist. Okay.
Code assist. And there are two types of code assist basically. There's the parameter info, which are the little tooltips that show up. And then there's the autocomplete, which is the drop-down that appears with all of the options that let you quickly finish what you're typing.
You know, I've never actually, I've not dug far. Dig's not a word. I've not dug far enough into some of these settings to realize I didn't actually. I knew you could tweak it a little bit. I sometimes forget how many ways you can customize this. I will say, like, one of the most commonly typed functions that I have in Power BI Desktop, you might be able to guess, is ABS. I autofill ABS so often. How many times have I actually used ABS as a function? Essentially 0. It's used sparingly, but being able to edit it here is very useful. But digressions aside, I think my call out would be is the IntelliSense, the code assist that you have, that's a pop-up for index. How does that compare to the IntelliSense pop-up that Power BI Desktop shows? Like, how much more robust is it in Tabular Editor?
Yeah, so I know that at least initially, when the December release was made available, that there were still some bugs with the formula bar where it would highlight errors that weren't there. So even if you typed everything correctly, it would still seemingly indicate that there would be an error somewhere in the code. I don't know if they already fixed that, but yeah, it's. I mean, sometimes we see these kinds of issues when new functions are coming up. But of course, we put a lot of effort into making sure that the IntelliSense within Tabular Editor 3 at least will work as good as we can make it with the knowledge we have of the functions that have been made available.
I actually just as one last comment, I dropped a screenshot because I can't share it, but you have a lot more that actually describes what each section is. All that Power BI Desktop shows at the moment is it's just a little string of text that just says it retrieves a row at an absolute position with a specified partition, but there's not as much information that yeah, there you go,
right,
that's as popular.
Yeah.
So
so
that's all you get.
Really, yeah, I see. Yeah, and we should really big shout out to Marco and Alberto from SQL BI here, because what we do at Tabular Editor is we just shamelessly steal all of the descriptions for both the function itself and its parameters from this awesome website. If you haven't heard of it, make sure you take a note and bookmark it, dax.guide. It is the ultimate documentation for all of the DAX functions in the world. And everything you see here basically is just what we copy and use within the tooltips in Tabular Editor. So yeah, highly recommended resource for learning DAX, by the way.
Drop the link in the chat.
Awesome. Yeah, so just a quick note around since we're looking at the preference here, there's a lot of customization options. As you said, you can really tweak how these IntelliSense options work in Tabular Editor 3. You can also tweak a lot of stuff regarding auto formatting. So for example, stuff like if you notice the preferred way of typing like functions in DAX is always to use like uppercase letters, and Tabular Editor 3 will actually autocorrect all functions you input into uppercase. And this is actually a remnant from the days of developing tabular models in Visual Studio, where we didn't have like a very good text editor. I don't even think we had any syntax highlighting or coloring, distinguishing keywords and functions from other stuff. So I think at that point, Marco and Alberto also recommended starting to, or basically the DAX formatter service that these guys also created would also always correct function names into uppercase. Just to be able to visually distinguish functions more easily from code that is not function references. But actually in Tabular Editor we don't really care, because now we have a good text editor with syntax highlighting and color coding and all of that stuff. So if you don't like all of these big uppercase letters all over your code, like screaming out into your face, then you can actually just change the preferred formatting case to lower, and then the next time you hit the format button, as you see, you'll just use lowercase for function names instead. I mean, at this point, I've probably gotten so used to writing DAX with uppercase functions, so I'll just keep it at that. But I mean, if you have different preferences, you can go ahead and tweak it any way you like. And also, one last thing I would like to point out, in the latest release of Tabular Editor, so version 3.4.0, we now have a full configuration for all of the keyboard shortcuts in the tool. So you can find all of the commands available here. And then you can assign custom keyboard shortcuts to all of them. And interestingly, some of these commands were not even accessible before we released these features. So even though the commands had actually always been inside the tool or inside the editor components we were using, it's not until now that we actually have a way of exposing these commands. So for example, the editor we're using supports a command called multiple select add each and multiple select add next. And these are some pretty advanced commands that let you quickly select multiple occurrences of the same word as what you currently have selected. So just as a demonstration, let me quickly add a shortcut to these. So let me add Control-Alt-N for this guy and Control-Alt-E for this guy. And now basically what happens is, let's say I write some DAX code here. Let's say I highlight a particular word, and it could be in a comment, it could be anywhere, and I want to select the next occurrence of this particular word anywhere in my code. Then I can just hit the shortcut for that, and as you can see, just as I continually hit this shortcut combination, I select all the occurrences of this particular word. And this works in conjunction with the find and replace dialog. So if you toggle stuff like match case or whole word only, then it'll of course only match those occurrences. So just to say that there's actually a lot of really powerful code editor features built in, and now thanks to the new keyboard configuration that we have here, you can actually make use of them and configure it to your likings.
And I mean, I use Tabular Editor on a regular basis, but I was never a full-blown coder as much as an analyst. So like there's still 10% of the features that I'm sure are available as either keyboard macros or other stuff. I'm amazed with the friends who like I know a few macros, but it's still hard for those to keep in my brain because it's almost like a muscle memory, right? And I know individuals who, for like Chrome, they know 30. For Excel, they know like 20. Yeah, they have hundreds of keyboard shortcuts mapped in their head. It's like, how do you like mentally just keep track of all of those and know which software? It's impressive.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I consider myself to be a pretty proficient coder after all, but I'm really bad at using keyboard shortcuts myself. So I normally spend a lot of time, just using the mouse clicking all over the place. But actually, once we enable this, or once we released this feature a couple of weeks ago, it didn't take Kurt, who we talked about earlier, Kurt Buehler, more than a couple of days to write up a blog post showcasing all of the really awesome things you can do with these custom keyboard shortcuts. So, for example, if you're using macros in Tabular Editor 3, so that's when you create a C# script and you save it as a reusable macro. You can actually assign custom keyboard shortcuts to your macros as well. So you can really, I mean, once you start to get into those more technical areas,
here we are.
There are really some great benefits for increased productivity there as well, like assigning custom keyboard shortcuts to your own macros. So yeah, that's the one you just put in the chat. That's a really great blog post.
I have not read it yet. So like, oh wait, there's a new blog post by Kurt. Okay, I got to go read this. If nothing else, just for the images, the amazing data. The artist that he has do those is fantastic.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so enough about the index function. I think we sort of get the point of what it's doing. Let's take a look at the next function, which is offset. So some of you may already have realized what the point of this function is. So this basically shifts a table of data by the number of rows that we specify as delta. So when we execute this query in an empty filter context on the same table as before, we're just going to get the numbers 2 through 10 because we basically shifted the result set upwards, meaning the row at the top is basically ignored. So it's kind of similar to like when you're doing I think it's actually an undocumented function, but there's an undocumented function called top-end skip, which allows you to like skip into a set of rows, and this is basically doing the same thing, in that it allows you to jump to a particular set of rows, and you can do that in both directions as well. Again, using the minus that we saw before. So if I type -3, I'm going to remove or basically shift the result set down 3 rows, thus removing the bottom 3 rows of the result set. But other than that, it supports exactly the same parameters as the index function that we saw before. So all of that works exactly the same way. Basically, it's just a different way of indexing into the data. Make sense?
And I will even just say that like that, for most Power BI developers or individuals who built calendar tables over the years, offset's actually to me one of the most familiar, because I've been using like offset columns for years as a kind of a quick and easy way to do certain date filters and stuff. So like day offset, week offset, month offset. And it's something that people have definitely seen in a lot of tables. So I think it's a nice translation to be able to see that, then be able to get used in DAX, where you basically just look at, current context of row and be able to then move backwards or forwards by periods or anything else for comparison purposes.
Yeah. Exactly, and I actually have a demo showing just that right after this, where we're using offset to perform some time-related calculations. So yeah, it's really useful. Now the last one I want to show is the function called window, and as you can see from the syntax here, before we get to the relation parameter or the order by parameter that specifies the table we want to input, we actually have 4 parameters here to specify the window or the rows that we want to retrieve. And only 2 of them are mandatory, from and to, whereas from type and to type are optional. So let's start to type something in Tabular Editor, and then we can see from the code suggestions here and the call tips what to expect. So basically, once we get to the from type parameter, we have 2 options. One is, or both of them are keywords. Basically, there's the ABS keyword and the rel keyword. So basically, these are abbreviated. This is not the ABS function. It's a new keyword that was introduced specifically for the window function. So abs in this case meaning absolute, and rel in this case meaning relative. So let's first try to use the absolute function, which is the default, by the way. So if we don't specify from type, it'll default to absolute. And then we can do the same thing for the to parameter, and then once again specify the numbers 1 to 10. So any of our viewers who've already played with these functions probably already know what this is going to return, but just as an exercise for the audience, let me see what you think this particular invocation will show us. So you can just write what you think it'll show us in the chat. I mean, if anyone out there is still listening.
Oh yeah, the sorry, which link were you wanting to put into the chat?
No, I'm just asking the viewers if they can guess what this function is going to output when we type it out like this.
First person to get the right answer, I'll put it onto the screen too, if they can guess for that one. It's actually one thing that I enjoy building into my presentations is I have fun with PowerPoint slides and doing like the clickable little sections where you can reveal the question and answer. All right, we do.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so we do have one answer here.
So a little hint here.
From Matthias.
I put 1 as the from parameter and 5 as the to parameter.
And I'm managing. So like I'm actually not positive of what it will be because I need to think and not manage this. We have a few different answers. If you know the correct one, it hasn't been mentioned yet.
Yes, it has. So let's try to execute this.
Okay.
We get the values 1 through 5, and Rafal was the first one to.
There you go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, that's nice. Yeah. So the point here is it's when we're using the absolute keyword here, which is also the default, we're basically indexing into the table in the same way as the index function works, except this time. We are retrieving an interval of rows from this table, so a window of rows basically, starting from row number 1, which is the from parameter we specified, and ending with the row number 5. And since the numbers in this table are basically just correspond to the row numbers, we're just getting the numbers 1 through 5 in this case. So if we type 3 through 7, well, that's what we're just going to get. So it's yeah, very simple basically. And once again, we can use the negative indexing if we want to index from the bottom. So in this case, we are indexing from row number 3 until the last row of the window. So yeah, that's what window does. So the other parameter, relative, is a bit hard to demonstrate when we're doing when we're writing a DAX query like this, because this takes the current filter context or the current evaluation context into account. So basically, by looking at, okay, so based on the input data that we have provided, If there is, can we identify a row within that input data that corresponds to what is currently filtered or what is available in the row context? And then we're basically counting from that row, either upwards or downwards when we're using the relative positioning. So that's a little hard to explain here, but we'll get back to it in a second when we see some examples, some more realistic examples. Okay, so are there any questions for now? Should we take some questions along the way, or what do you think, Reed?
Yeah, so you did answer the question that we had earlier, couple of the ones we had earlier, and otherwise I think there's just kind of chatter around some of the other people who have been, related to the development of the Tabular engine and DAX and stuff, but I don't believe I've missed any. If there has been, of course, feel free to redrop it in here and then I'll post it back up, but otherwise I think we're good to keep going.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so just want to once again bring up Jeffrey's blog post, because he actually put some really nice illustrations in here. So this is one example where the entire table that's being inputted is everything you see on the screen here, all of these records. And now the current row, meaning let's say there's a filter, or we're inside of an iterator or whatever, and for some reason we end up only having this row as the current row of that evaluation context. Well, in that case, we can see how the different functions are going to work. So, for example, offset with a value of -1 is going to shift from the current row in an upwards direction, whereas with a positive value, it's going to shift downwards. Index, once again, is just an absolute index of these of this table. So we start from the top or the bottom if we use negative values. And finally, the window functions select an interval of rows based on the parameters that we specify. So all of these details are available in Jeffrey's blog post. So I highly recommend checking those out if you want to learn more about these functions. So let's see how these functions can be used in real life to actually make some code easier to write. I think I'm going to start with some examples that use time calculations. So let me just open. I have a query here that I prepared.
I feel like that for almost any type of pattern, it almost always falls back to good examples related to date or time.
Yeah, I think those are just the ones that are most easy to grasp, because we've all been working with them at some point or another, right? So yeah, at least that's how I feel about it, and that's, I mean, also when you're creating a demo, it's usually easier to come up with something that's related to time than anything else.
Yep.
Okay, so of course, time intelligence in DAX is nothing new. We've been able to do this for several years. We're either using the built-in time intelligence functions or by using some custom time patterns and a custom date table. There are a lot of possibilities in that regard, but sometimes it can be a bit hard to grasp your head around exactly what's going on with the time intelligence function. And I think the new window functions offer some help, which maybe not exactly for time calculations, but I mean, at least once you see the demo and you understand what these functions can do, you can probably more easily apply these patterns to other types of queries or other analysis that you want to create. So basically, in this example, I prepared a couple of measures that do different things. So in this query, I just summarize sales amount by date. And then I created a month-to-date version, which you can see it accumulates nicely throughout the month, and then when we reach the next month, it resets. We have another
quick question just for both.
Yeah,
just a quick question for the text in the expressions. If you can zoom in, yeah, there you go. Zoom in on them just a teeny bit. Perfect.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so hopefully this is better. So yeah, so what I was saying is that the sales amount month to date measure is just basically, we see how it accumulates nicely throughout the month, and then when we get to the next month, it starts over. Sales amount yesterday just returns the value on the day before. As you can see, these numbers here are identical. Sales amount first day of month just keeps the value of the first day of the month throughout all of the days here. And similarly with the sales amount last day of month, it just retains the value from the last day of that month. And all of these measures have been implemented using the new window function. So none of these measures use the regular time intelligence functions that you would normally have used for these. So let's take a closer look how these are implemented. So I'm going to create a DAX script here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. So first of all, let's take a look at the sales amount month to date. So the interesting bit here is the calculate function. In fact, we can also bring it out into the expression editor by itself here. So basically what we're doing is we have the sales amount measure, and then we use calculate because we want to modify the filter context in which sales amount is evaluated. And this time around, we're going to use the window function because what we want to do is we want to keep all of the dates from the first one of the current partition, and I'll get back to the partition in a bit, up until the current row basically of dates that we're looking at. So if the current current row is the 27th of March, well then this window is going to define something that ends where the last row is the 27th of March. Now I said partition before, I didn't mention the partition by, but the partition basically allows us to specify a segment of rows in which this window is going to which are basically the rows that are going to be considered when evaluating how far to go back. So in this case, as you can see, I specified year month as the partition, meaning as soon as we go into a different month or a different year, then we're going to have a new partition, and then basically the window is going to reset. So when we use absolute positioning like we do here, it means that we are always going to start with the first day of every month. So basically, typing the expression this way, we're going to select all of the dates that, in a given month, starting from the first day of that month up until the current row of the month. And the current row, of course, is determined based on the filter context of the expression. So if I'm looking at the 27th of March, well, then the current row is going to be the row of my date table that is the 27th of March. So this is all a little complicated. So one way to make this a little easier to grasp is to use a feature in Tabular Editor 3, which is the debugger that we also talked about in earlier live streams. And basically the way we invoke that, so if we have a query like the one I have here on my screen, and I want to understand how a value that like this came about, I can simply just right click on this cell and choose the debug option. And this then launches the Tabular Editor 3 debugger. So now we're in debugging mode. We can see the code that is currently being executed. We can see the value that this code is evaluating to, which should correspond with the cell that we originally started our debugging session from. And one more interesting thing here that I would like to do, which is a new feature that is coming up. It's not yet in the public release of Tabular Editor, but I will show you anyway. We can add a diagram to the table, and we will add the date table to the diagram. Now, what I wanted to show you here, let's bring this over on the right side of the screen, is that we have these little numbers. So one reason we haven't released this feature yet is we're still working on how best to visualize.
So the diagram is the new feature, correct?
Well, diagrams have always been a part of Tabular Editor 3, but the new feature here is that when you're debugging DAX code like we're doing right now, and you then bring up the diagram, it will actually show you some statistics about the current filter context. So in this case, since we started our debugging session on this particular cell, we can see that right now only one out of the 1096 rows that are available in the full date table is actually visible in this filter context, and that is the 27th of March, which is the one we drill into. So let's see what happens as we dive into the code. So let's jump straight into the place where we invoke the sales amount measure. So now we can see that the filter context has been modified, and we can also tell that since the outer filter here is now striked out, meaning that now a new filter context was introduced, and sure enough, the filter context or the modified filter arises from the window function that we used. But moreover, the diagram will now tell us, okay, so now in this filter context we have 27 rows visible on the date table, and these are the rows starting from the 1st of March until the 27th of March. So here we get a more like interactive experience on on what the consequences of this new modified filter context is. So just a hint for those of you who don't have this new feature yet, and I don't have any ETA on when we can actually ship it, but we can use the watch expression window here to do basically the same thing. So just by typing, for example, date, the name of the date table, it tells us right here that this is now a table that contains 27 rows in this filter context. If we go back to the outer summarized columns, then we can see that now there's only one row, because that's the 27th. And if we go to an empty filter context, we can see that we now have all 1096 rows. And
I had a question actually on that. So let me gotta get to our page to pop it up. Here we go. So yeah, they were wanting the if the total for the 1096 is that always counted with the filters removed.
Yeah, so the reason the total is 1096 is because the raw unfiltered table contains 1096 rows. So when there are no filters on the date table, those are the rows that we're going to see. Let me just quickly add one more expression to the watch window here, just to make it a bit easier, because just like we have in the diagram view up here, we can just type any expression here. So if we do something like minimum dates, and then we can add a little dash and maximum dates, then we get the nice, we basically get the same thing as we saw. We can do count rows, if I can spell that right, count rows of date as well. So we basically get the same information here as we would have from the diagram view. But as I said, we're working on figuring out some better ways to visualize the filter context in the diagram view. You know, imagine having different colors and columns that are filtered, and showing which relationships are going to propagate this filter from one table to another, and so on. But just in the meantime, this is one of the things you can use the watch window for to get this information right here. So basically, going back to the window function, we've already seen how the window function in this case modifies the filter context. So instead of having only one row of the date table, the window function now shows us 27 rows of the date table. So basically month to date as we wanted it to. We can also jump to this part just to see what it's actually doing. And then on the locals view, we can see what the output from this expression is, and it also shows us what is the input to the window function. So basically, what are the rows that we are feeding into the window function in this case, and then what is the output from that. So notice that in this case we're actually only feeding 366 rows into the window function, and not all of the 1096 rows that we saw on the date table. And the reason for that is that we actually have one more filter applied to this query, which is the top level filter, where we say we only want to consider the year 2008. And since 2008 was a leap year, we have 366 days on our date table for that year. So those are the records that are being fed into the window function. And based on the current row in the filter context, which we can tell from our watch expression, which is the 27th of March, it determines that this combination of parameters should return 27 rows, namely all the rows from the 1st of March until the 27th of March. So yeah, so this is how we can basically use the debugger to inspect what's going on and how it's modifying the filter context as we dive deeper into the calculations. And I noticed in the chat, Marco wrote that he's actually working on an article on the DAX debugger. So yeah,
Oh,
most
excellent.
likely
Okay.
we will see a lot of good stuff coming out of SQL BI soon. So you can learn more about this feature.
Yeah, for some reason I assumed he would have already written an article. Will that be his first one that he's written on he left the chat, he had to go. But will that be the first time he's written about the debugger?
I think so, yeah. So the debugger has been kind of a moving target over the past half year, so I understand why he didn't get to it sooner.
Gotcha. Okay.
But now we are kind of at a stable point, so it makes a lot of sense to start making content about it.
If he does, because they don't really do videos as well in conjunction with some of those articles. So if he actually does like a thorough walkthrough of it, I'm sure it's going to be like the gold standard of this is what you need to do if you want to learn the ins and outs of how to use it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's see how some of the other window functions work. So if we go to the sales amount yesterday measure, notice how this value in here on the 12th of March corresponds to the value on the 11th of March. So we're basically just shifting the filter context one day backwards in time. So if we debug into this guy, we can see that in this case we just use the offset function, and this one is actually, it has a pretty simple syntax where we just specify -1 all selected date, and then we just auto by date. And as I said earlier, we could actually omit the auto by, since most likely we would get the date output, the date table output in the correct order. So in this case, the -1 here just indicates that starting from the current row of the evaluation context, just go back one row, and then that's it for modifying the filter context. And sure enough, if we look at our watch expressions from before, we can see we started out on the 12th of March. And then once we jump into to this particular measure, we are now at the 11th of March. So sure enough, the offset function managed to switch back the filter context by one day.
And I think with like offset among the rest of these, like the one thing that I see with is a lot of implications where I know with DAX there's a lot of pain points of people understanding context transition, filter context versus row context, and everything that goes into, wait, do I calculate this at the the model row level? Do I calculate this at the visual level? And I think many of these will help people to be like, I don't care how my model looks. I just know that the visual that I have in front of me has 18 bars. I want to be able to compare bar 17 to 16. So offsets and all these others will just like, I just know I want to go back to one prior period, the previous customer or something like that, just simply comparing before and after. So these I think will be really helpful in debuggable measures that calculate a lot more at the visual level versus the row level, and not necessarily even having to understand filter context, or better said, not having to fully understand context transition, but still being able to write something that gives you the number that you need.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and definitely. I mean, in the past, having to do these kinds of calculations where you want to shift your filter like by a relative amount inside of a table, that was just a real pain, because I mean you would have to have typically iterators inside of iterators, rank X, and all of that stuff. So so yeah, I think that's some of the stuff that we will see. The new window functions will make a lot easier going forward.
Exactly.
So let's see, the last ones I have here. So sales amount first day of month and last day of month. So you already saw how month to date, since that now encompasses multiple rows, since we want to aggregate multiple days in these cases. Then for that reason alone, we would have to use the window function just to make sure that we get an interval of rows into a filter context, whereas the yesterday measure used offset function, since we're just interested in getting one particular date, namely the date before the current one. So this one used window, this one used offset. So you can probably already guess where I'm going with this measure, first day of month. This is going to use the last one of the three functions, namely the index function. So in order to get the first day of a month, once again, we have to specify a partition because otherwise, if we omitted the partition by, we would just get the first day of the calendar table itself, or at least of the days from the calendar table that are visible. That would probably be the 1st of January 2008 in that case. Since we have the filter for 2008. But once again, using the partition by, very similar syntax as the window function that we saw earlier. We can specify that we want to get the first row of this partition, and that would then happen to be the first day of every month. Similarly, with the last day of the month, it looks very, very similar. The only difference is that now we have a negative one instead of one, because we want to get the last row of this interval of rows. Otherwise, the syntax is identical. So yeah, once again, I think these are some very powerful functions that can help us navigate tables in a much more efficient way than what we've been able to do previously.
Yeah, I'm looking forward as well to seeing some of the use cases for this, even like with some of the custom labeling and everything that you can do with calculation groups and some of the stuff that Kane Schneider and a few others have done. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of blogs and other stuff coming out and continue to come out that will find creative outlets for utilizing these. They also, I think, compared to some of the ways you used to have to do some of these calculations in the past, they're also very fast. For most of the posts that I've read, granted, I've been more window shopping than applying these myself, but everything that I've looked into so far has mentioned that like I've tried to hammer this into a lot of large models and other stuff, and they seem to be very efficient at doing their calculations by calling upon any of the built-in metadata and row orders and indexes that are already built into the tabular engine by the time the visual is generated at the visual level inside of a query in any of the containers on the page.
Yeah, I definitely think that using these functions allow you to express the semantics of what you want to achieve in a different way. Even though the result is the same, but this way of expressing the semantics and telling the formula engine what it is that you want using these functions allows it to generate a more efficient query plan behind the scenes. And especially, I think, for direct query scenarios, there were some optimizations. I think Chris Webb from the Power BI CAT team already published an article about this. How he saw some performance improvements on direct query when using these functions. So yeah. In any case, I guess it's really worthwhile learning these functions and knowing how to use them right.
And I'll post a link here in a minute to Chris Webb's blog if I can get it. Here we go. Yeah. Why window functions are important. Oh, that's nice. It was the very, very first article. So I'll drop that.
There you go.
Cool.
Yeah.
I read that and I absorbed about 70% of it, I think. There's same with like Jeffrey's articles. There's certain articles that I will read that I come across, and I'll probably need to reread this again in 6 months when it becomes useful for a client scenario. But it got technical, and it was interesting to see him branch out into a non-Power Query article as well, because that's most of what he normally writes on. But I guess it makes sense because it's still, it passes through the PQ engine in a way to actually hand it off. So technically, it's still under the umbrella of that, but it's hybrid DAX and Power Query.
Yeah, that's right. No, but I think, I fully understand why these functions would seem a little bit intimidating, at least for now. I'm sure that we will see future investments that make these easier to digest. And also, I think that a lot of MVPs are already working on blog posts with better examples and with more helpful material, so people can really learn these functions inside out and recognize when they are useful and valuable.
And as a continued nod to using like Tabular Editor 3, you've seen from that screenshot that Daniel showed that I took earlier is there is some IntelliSense built into the Power BI desktop, but the code assist, if you use the right right word, that's built into Tabular Editor 3 is very helpful in helping you to continue to understand this. And I think you said you lifted and shifted this from DAX.guide, which is still the de facto source for the most part to go and
exactly
not only get the description, but any related articles that Marco or Alberto ever write will then be put down here at the bottom. It looks like they've maybe not written any articles about it yet, but
I would be surprised if they aren't already working on that. So
I'm sure. I think exactly.
Yeah, I think Marco even said so in his New Year's video that was released a couple of days ago. So yeah, expect more content very soon.
Excellent. I did have another good question to pop up here. So I'm assuming by it, I will think they're referring to index. Would index produce an error or blank if you break the rules, i.e. like greater than the number of rows or ties in the order?
Actually, a good question. So far, I haven't been able to make any of the functions produce an error unless I use the wrong syntax. So I think it will just return a blank in that case. So if I index into position 15 on the number table that only has 10 rows, I expect to just get a blank, which is what I get. So no errors as far as I can tell.
And I think to me that makes sense because the index number is basically it's a filter you're applying to tell it to reduce the rows, and filters never error, they just either return a row or don't return a row. So it functions like any other type of filter that you would have in DAX, which I think is consistent with how that type of logic works. Yeah,
that's I agree. So one thing that I did notice, however, one way we can provoke an error is if the table expression that we specify here adds columns to the expression. So let's say, for example, I do something like, let's say we do something like add columns, and then we take basically just all of our dates, and we want to add sales amount, because let's say for some reason we wanted to sort the data by sales amount before indexing into them. That would be a pretty valuable use case in my opinion, that we would sort by some measure to get the top 3 customers or whatever, and then index into that sorted list of customers. However, as you can already see from the error indication in Tabular Editor, the function index may not be used on a table expression containing extension columns, such as those added by add columns. So darn. So for some reason it still worked when I executed it, but as you can see, it didn't return any value. So yeah, it could be there's some kind of discrepancy here. I will have to look into that. But I did notice that sometimes we get this error from the engine when we execute a query like this. So it seems that at least for now we can't rank expressions based on measures when using the window functions. But who knows? Maybe that will change in a future update. Okay,
that's good to know. And I'm guess. Well, actually, that is kind of a curiosity. I'm wondering if they will, now that this has been released, adjust these at all. But I'm guessing that there's probably performance implications of the reason that they don't allow for summarize or add columns. That's probably is not a decision that was made arbitrarily. So I would wonder why some of those limitations are in place. Outside of my first guess would just be a performance issue.
Yeah, probably.
That's good to know. But I did have one other question from a follow, if I can bring this up. Let's see. So they were wanting to see if they wanted to know if they could see an example related to the partition function and SumX in the debugger.
So I guess we could probably see that if we go back to. So I'm not sure exactly what you're asking here, but if we take one of these, let's just take this one, where we have the partition by, and this was the one that did the month-to-date calculation. Here, the debugger actually lets us, since we're referencing the sales amount measure here, we can actually debug further into that measure, where we then have the SumX. And then once we get to the expression of the SumX, you can see that now the evaluation context also shows us the row context of the sales table. And in this context, the sales table only contains 469 rows, which would basically be all the rows that have sales within this, interval of dates, because that's the filter context on the date table. So I'm not sure if that was what the question wanted, what the questioner wanted to know, but yeah, I mean, it works regardless of whether there's an iterator or whatever. The debugger just shows all of these evaluation contexts one by one here.
And I mean, in general, just huge fan of the DAX debugger. It's a fantastic tool. So it's the closest
really,
we've gotten to a true like code walkthrough. What remind me, what is the new DAX function as well that does let you see a little bit of the
evaluate
process? Thank you, evaluate and log.
Evaluate and log.
Yes.
And which is a really nice function, because it actually lets you see the internals of the engine, which is something that wasn't possible before. However, the downside of that function is you have to go in and modify your code and put this. So I mean, in traditional software development, it's kind of similar to like when you put in random, console.log or whatever statements all over your code to debug into it, and then at some point you would also have to go in and clean it up, I guess. And moreover, of course, if you're using an older version of analysis services, like an on-premise SQL Server analysis services, then you won't have access to that function. So yeah, that's some of the advantages of the DAX debugger in Tabular Editor 3, is that you don't need to modify your code. It works with any version of analysis services. However, it's not like it's opening up the internals of the formula engine the same way the evaluate and log function is, which is really nice, honestly, because you can see some things using that function that wouldn't otherwise be possible to extract, even for Tabular Editor's debugger. I think I explained this also in the session we did last year, Reed, that the debugger in Tabular Editor 3 is not a true debugger in that sense. It's a pseudo debugger, in that it just generates a lot of queries behind the scenes, simulating the various evaluation contexts that are set along the way to basically show you all of the information that you see here. But it's not like it's hooking into any internals of the AS engine or anything like that. It's just submitting a ton of queries whenever you're navigating it. So not a real debugger, but a tool that at least pretends and feels like a debugger.
Well, I mean, it's by and far the best thing that we have to do this. Like, nothing else does it. There's nothing else that, I don't even think there's anything else that even tries to do it. Then honestly, like, between this, which we have this now for being able to like walk through the code, and if we want to actually do performance tuning, we have DAX Studio. So between the two products, like, you essentially have your complete tool set to be able to make sure that the numbers are right and that it runs at a speed that you would like it to.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's two completely different problems, right? Because first you have to make sure that you get the right result, and then you can look at performance if it turns out to be slow for some reason. So yeah, it's two entirely different problems that you have to solve.
Exactly, and like this does make stepping through the information easier than in DAX Studio, because like you can in DAX Studio return it's a scalar, single value, a column, or a table. And if you want to, you can like kind of highlight and run subqueries and all that other stuff, but it requires like rewriting the code or selecting the code, and it's kind of like trying to debug a SQL view. It can be a little bit cumbersome. This makes it really easy just to step through, see row counts, numbers, get the numbers right here first, then go in and like, all right, how can I shave 30% off of the information to get it to, where do I apply the filter, inside or outside of these functions, and how do I get it to speed up?
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent. So, yeah, no, this has been good. We're getting up a little over an hour here. I think overall there's been some great stuff to cover. I'm really excited to see some of these new functions, and especially like similar to the field parameter from last year, I think there's going to be a lot of people coming out with plenty of articles on fun and creative ways to utilize this. I'm hoping, like, Kane Schneider, if you're watching this, and some articles that might come out from you as well, or more articles that will come out from you on this, because I know you've already utilized that a bit, but I think it's a high ceiling of possibility of utilizations for this, and even some considerations on combining this with other stuff like field parameters and many different creative ways to continue to utilize these for modeling, and then hopefully just making it easier for people to calculate whatever number they need to arrive at for any particular visual. So
Yep.
But
I
yeah,
agree.
I think
So
taking a quick look, and yeah, there was just some questions in the chat. Rafal, I do see you asking if we're going to cover. Yeah, so I have 2 live streams next week. Matthias will be on with me on Tuesday, and we're going to have some fun talking about ChatGPT. I haven't actually brought that up with you, Daniel, like because I feel like there's potential for many different technologies to start utilizing that, and technically Microsoft uses it already in the measure suggestion tool. It's not ChatGPT, but
yeah,
it's OpenAI, and they have a similar
yeah,
bot or a similar
it's some kind of language model. Yeah,
yeah, I mean, and technically ChatGPT uses that. It's called Code GPT 3, which is
right,
used
right.
and Code GPT is because technically ChatGPT connects to about 5 different other ones. It's just the communication tool to allow it to use one of like multiple different packages for
Yeah,
that.
I
So
see.
they're incorporating that into a few different areas. But I'm very curious to see how in the next 12 to 24 months, many different products will start incorporating it. I do hope an Outlook plugin comes in at some point. If I can click a button to have it just like I write the email, but it's almost like Grammarly. It just rewrites and kind of polishes up your email that you're sending to a client. That would be really useful. So that's like my number
Someday,
one feature request is something like that.
someday the entire internet is just going to be, bots sending messages back and forth with no human intervention.
We'll,
But
we-
yeah,
we'll be
we'll see
gone,
how it
and the
goes.
only things left alive will just be AI bots talking back and forth to each other. Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly.
Yeah.
But Daniel, thank you so much for coming on for this. Like you mentioned, I know you're recovering from a flu, so I appreciate you coming on and powering through all that. And this has been a great talk, and I think a good start to the new year as well. So thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Absolutely, and I'm sure we'll have you back on sometime around this time in 2024 if we keep up with the pattern.
Yeah,
Yeah,
most likely. I mean, it's just something that happens, I guess.
exactly. Excellent. Well, enjoy the rest of your night and your weekend, and we'll chat soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Same to you.
Thank you so much for watching. Please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. And if you want to help support this channel, take a look at our channel memberships or our merchandise store for cool swag. And last but not least, please consider sharing this video on your social media platform of choice to help our channel grow. So, until next time.